Breaking news banners flickered in blood red across cable news screens. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett fined $10 million ethics violation ruling shocks Capitol Hill. The anchor's voice cut through the static like a scalpel. In a surprise federal ruling today, Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett has been fined $10 million for alleged defamation and misconduct. The court documents claim a repeated pattern of inflammatory speech targeting judiciary officials, most notably Judge Robert Henley. Panic rippled across Capitol Hill like a dropped glass in a silent hall, inside her D.C. office, dimly lit. By the amber hue of a setting sun, Jasmine Crockett sat motionless. The court ruling rested on the desk before her, printed in sharp black ink, stamped with judicial finality, a white envelope. A death sentence disguised as bureaucracy. She didn't blink. Behind the frosted door, her aides whispered in urgent fragments. She hasn't said a word. 10 million? That's a message, not a fine. Did you see who signed the opinion? Henley. Silence. Of course it was Henley. Jasmine's fingers gently traced the embossed court seal. Every muscle in her face held still, but something beneath her eyes simmered. Not fear, not disbelief. Something older. A knowing. A rage that had matured past screaming. She rose slowly, walking to the window. Outside, traffic hummed without. Concern. Protesters from last week's education bill had moved on. The world spun, unaware that in this room something fundamental had just ruptured. A voice finally broke the air. Congresswoman? It was Malik, her chief of staff, young, sharp, idealistic enough to still believe rules had meaning. He held a copy of the ruling, crumpled slightly at the edges. His mouth opened, searching for something useful to say. Nothing came. He looked down. I know what this is, she said, her voice a low blade. They could have censured me, suspended me. But 10 million, that's not about ethics. She turned to face him. That's about silence. Malik looked up. Do you want to make a statement? She smiled, faintly tired but defiant. Not yet. She returned to her desk, flipped the ruling over, and picked up a pen. She drew a line across the signature. And Judge Henley, a man she once accused on record of covering up judicial lobbying from a defense contractor in a prison privatization case, she hadn't been wrong. She had just been early. The pen tapped once, twice, then stopped. They want a headline? I'll give them a story. She slid the document aside and opened a new legal file. On the tab, she wrote 3 words in bold, all caps. Counter lawsuit. Etched in alleyway outside, the Capitol dome gleamed under a dying sun. Inside, Jasmine Crockett prepared for war. Not just to defend herself. To burn the rot down to the foundation. And this time, she wouldn't fight quiet. The room was colder than usual. Mahogany panels lined the walls of courtroom 6C, but the grandeur felt hollow like a church that had forgotten why it existed. The American flag stood limp in the corner. Judge Robert Henley sat on the bench like a man who believed the wood beneath him was carved from divine authority. He adjusted his robes slowly, deliberately. Cameras weren't allowed in this hearing, but everyone knew this was being staged for headlines. The court reporter typed with robotic rhythm as Henley cleared his throat and began reading from a prepared statement. This court has found sufficient cause to impose a civil penalty on Representative Jasmine Crockett for repeated violations of professional conduct, including slanderous statements that endangered the integrity of this bench and the impartiality of our legal system. In the gallery, his words echoed without soul. He wasn't just reading law. He was wielding it like a weapon. Behind closed doors, somewhere in a smoky Georgetown club, Henley had been the quiet enforcer of a dying order. Old donors, ancient power brokers, the men whose names never made headlines because they paid others to speak for them. And when Jasmine Crockett stood on the House floor and named names, accused him of backdoor deals with correctional lobbyists, she didn't just embarrass a judge, she declared war on the machinery. Now, the machinery was answering. In a briefing room 2 floors below, Jasmine watched a live transcript roll across a private screen. Her attorney, Daria Singh, leaned in with a grimace. They're dressing it up as ethics, but this is political theater. Henley's reciting from a script. Jasmine didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Daria continued. You speak truth too publicly. You break too many unwritten rules. They call it defamation. 10 million? That's not law. That's a message to every woman in Congress who thinks her voice is her own. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice almost detached. They want a scalp. They're hoping I walk away quietly. Will you? No, she said without hesitation. But I'll walk in differently. She rose and walked toward the window. The courtroom feed still ran beside her. Judge Henley's tone hadn't wavered, measured, cold, but underneath it, there was fear disguised as authority. She could feel it, because men like Henley didn't fear protest signs or op-eds. They feared evidence. They feared exposure. And Jasmine had both. Daria pulled a thick folder from her briefcase. A quiet thud as it hit the desk. We've been compiling since the committee hearings, financial trails, correspondence between his office and Third Point Security. The email leak from the contractor whistleblower, is it enough? Jasmine asked. Daria didn't answer immediately. It's enough to make the court sweat, maybe enough to make him fall. Jasmine turned from the window, her eyes like polished steel. Then we file. Countersuit? Full political targeting. Abuse of authority, judicial misconduct. Daria nodded slowly, understanding what Jasmine was risking. You'll be going up against more than him. I know, Jasmine said, already writing her press statement by hand. But the truth isn't supposed to be polite? Upstairs, Judge Henley concluded his ruling with a flourish of finality. Let this serve as a reminder. No one, no matter how powerful, is above accountability. The irony was acidic. Jasmine pressed her pen down hard as she signed the final page of her legal counteroffensive. Her signature curved like a sword slash, and no one, she whispered, is beneath it either. The storm had officially begun. But it wouldn't be Jasmine buried in the debris, not this time. The clock on the wall ticked like a slow metronome. Inside the war room of Jasmine's campaign office, stripped of its posters, now humming with legal documents instead of slogans, she stared at a paused video on a projector screen. Her own face, her voice from 7 months ago, the congressional hearing had been packed. Network crews had broadcast it live. She remembered the air that day thick with sweat and certainty. Judge Robert Henley had been under review for his alleged connections to a private defense contractor bidding on prison surveillance software. Jasmine had stood, eyes unblinking, voice sharp. Let's be clear. When a federal judge regularly receives bundled donations from a lobbying firm whose CEO texts his clerk at midnight about upcoming sentencing reforms, that's not just unethical. It's state-sponsored corruption. There had been audible gasps. Members of the House Judiciary Committee had shuffled awkwardly in their seats. Henley had glared at her, his hands still, but his knuckles white with pressure. No one had responded directly. The hearing had moved on, but she saw it clearly now. That was the moment the mirror broke. She clicked the remote, the video disappeared, replaced by a cold digital document. Fine, $10 million, her name in all caps. The signature, Robert A. Henley. Across the table, Malik leaned forward. You knew it would come back around. I thought it would come in whispers, backroom punishments, committee blocks. Not this. You embarrassed him, he said carefully. On record? On television? You didn't just accuse him, you drew blood? Jasmine leaned back in her chair. The leather cracked slightly beneath her. He had a choice. He could have called for an internal investigation, taken the high ground. But he waited, then weaponized the robe. Daria entered with a laptop, open to a legal forum thread already buzzing with commentary. Judges, former law clerks. One message was underlined, filing. That size for a single individual? Highly irregular. Almost punitive political retaliation lawsuit inbound? Jasmine read it, expressionless. They're already expecting me to hit back. Do we? Daria asked. Jasmine rose, walked to the window again, third time in 3 days, and stared at the slow drift of pedestrians outside, young interns. Staffers in blazers too big for them. A woman with a stroller pushing against the wind. We don't just hit back, she said. We tell the truth so loud it makes their silence unbearable. Behind her, Daria opened the legal files again. And for the first time in years, the law itself looked like it might tremble by dawn. The headlines had mutated into a frenzy. Crockett counterattacks, $10 million fine backfires as Judge Henley faces lawsuit, legal system in crisis or political circus. Cable panels buzzed with speculation. Half called her brave, the rest called her unhinged. One anchor on a conservative network sneered, "Is this the new normal? A congresswoman sues a judge when she doesn't like the ruling?" Across town, Daria flipped through the morning coverage in Jasmine's office, her tone brisk but calm. "We're gaining ground online. Lawyers are split. Some say this could set constitutional precedent, others think you'll be blackballed." Jasmine didn't look up from the draft of her second affidavit. "Let them blacklist me. At least I'll know whose silence was bought." Malik entered, phone in hand, voice tense. "It's not just lawyers. Civil rights groups are tweeting their support. 3 professors offered to submit amicus briefs. But we just got a warning too, back channel." "From who?" "A judiciary aide. Told me we should quiet this down before it becomes a problem for the institution." Jasmine paused, then leaned back in her chair, smiling bitterly. "Problem for who?" She stood, walking over to the window again, her favorite vantage point. Protesters had begun to gather, small clusters at first. Hand-drawn signs. A young woman wore a t-shirt that read, "Truth ain't defamation." Jasmine could feel the swell. Something bigger was forming beneath the media noise. "They want me to shut up because the court feels exposed. They're not afraid I'm lying, they're afraid I'm right." Across the city, in a private chamber beneath the courthouse, Henley met with a handful of legal advisors. The blinds were drawn. The mood was surgical. "She's mobilizing public sympathy," his senior aide said. "We need to strike now before the story becomes about judicial corruption instead of her misconduct." Henley massaged his temples. He hadn't slept, he hadn't eaten. But he wouldn't show it. Then file the motion to dismiss. Discredit the lawsuit before it breathes. On what grounds? Frivolous filing? Political stunt? Lack of standing? Take your pick. He stood abruptly and stared out the window. Jasmine's press conference replayed silently on the muted TV behind him. Her voice echoed in his. "Head, if truth costs $10 million, silence is a currency I refuse to trade in." He clenched his jaw. She wasn't supposed to be this loud. She wasn't supposed to survive the blow, and now she was turning his courtroom into a confession booth for the whole institution. By afternoon, the media crossfire had reached fever pitch. One segment on a liberal podcast called it the trial of judicial ego. Another declared her the anti-institutionalist of the year. Jasmine's office received over 1,000 emails in a single day, some full of fury, others full of hope. One from a retired black female judge read simply, "What they fear in you isn't your mouth, it's your clarity. Keep going." Jasmine read that one twice. Then she stood up, adjusted her blazer, and turned to her team. "Tell them we're not asking for justice. We're showing them what it looks like." The cameras were already rolling, and Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. The email arrived anonymously. No subject line. No sender name. Just a blinking dot in Jasmine's encrypted inbox at 2:14 a. M. Malik found it first. He burst into her apartment breathless, laptop in hand. Jasmine was still in sweats, sipping cold coffee by the window, her insomnia now routine. "You need to see this." She raised an eyebrow as he placed the laptop on the coffee table. The file was titled simply Henley_COMS_export.msg. "What is it?" "Internal emails. Between Henley's clerk and the CEO of Sentinel Systems." She froze. Sentinel Systems, the private defense contractor at the center of the prison's surveillance lobbying scandal. The same name she had uttered 7 months ago, on the House floor when Henley's face twitched for the first time. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "No clue, burner address, but it's clean, metadata matches. I ran it through 3 integrity filters." Jasmine leaned in. There were dozens of messages. Some mundane, some alarming. But one, dated 3 days before Henley's fine, made her go cold. "Make sure she's dealt with. She thinks she's untouchable. We need this fine to be loud and permanent." The clerk replied, "Understood." Working with Henley on the language will ensure it sticks. She sat back, breath caught in her chest. That's the smoking gun. Malik said, It's also poison, she whispered, because she knew exactly what this meant. Using this email could blow the case open or blow it up. It hadn't been obtained through a subpoena. The court could rule it inadmissible. Worse, it could paint her as reckless. Like she was willing to break norms to win. Daria joined them an hour later, jaw clenched as she read the messages. If we introduce this without a legal chain of custody, Henley's team will tear us apart. What if we leak it to the press anonymously? Malik offered. Then we lose narrative control? Jasmine said. And they'll claim we manufactured it. She stared out the window again. The city lights blinked in defiance. She was tired of blinking first. We subpoena the email chain, she said finally. Not now. Not. We let them walk into their own lie, and when they do, we crush them with their own words, Daria finished. Later that day, Jasmine sat alone in her office, the weight of the leak still pressing on her ribs. She opened her notebook, the one she never let anyone else read. On the last page, she wrote, "The truth is a fire, beautiful, dangerous. The question is, can I hold it without burning the cause I'm fighting for?" She closed the notebook. She knew the answer didn't matter, because the fire was already in her hands. The courtroom was quieter than usual, but no less hostile. This wasn't a trial. Not yet. This was the shadow round the place where powerful people killed lawsuits before they ever saw daylight. Jasmine sat with Daria and Malik at the plaintiff's table, stone-faced. Across from them, a sleek wall of Henley's legal firepower leaned in like predators sensing blood in the water. 4 lawyers, 3 assistants, 2 paralegals, all brought in from a private firm known for defending institutions against whistleblowers. The lead counsel, Benton Worth, rose with the smug smoothness of a man who knew how to weaponize politeness. "Your Honor, we respectfully move to dismiss the plaintiff's complaint in its entirety on the grounds that it is a politically motivated, baseless retaliation lacking any legal merit under current precedent." Judge Marcus, a moderate appointee known for her restraint, watched him carefully. She didn't blink. But she also didn't write anything down. Worth continued. "The judiciary must remain above partisan spectacle. Allowing this case to proceed would set a chilling precedent, opening the door for elected officials to retaliate against judges every time they dislike a ruling." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Jasmine without even looking at her. "This is not about justice. It is about optics. The plaintiff seeks headlines, not remedy." Jasmine felt her jaw tighten. Daria stood calmly. "Your Honor, the defense would have you believe this is about disagreement. It's not. This is about deliberate abuse of authority. We allege that a federal judge conspired with private interest to silence a sitting Congresswoman for protected political speech. That's not a spectacle. That's a crisis." She stepped forward, her voice steady but rising. "We have evidence of communications between Judge Henley's clerk and a major contractor, whose business interests were threatened by Representative Crockett's legislative oversight. We have timeline alignment between these communications and the issuance of the $10 million fine. We have motive, we have pattern. And soon we will have sworn testimony." Murmurs rose from the gallery. Judge Marquez tapped her gavel once. "I'll hear no more from the gallery. Counsel may proceed." Worth stood again, brushing off his coat sleeve. "Miss Crockett believes she can tear down the system from within. But this courtroom is not a pulpit. It is bound by law." Daria didn't flinch. "Then let the law speak." The judge paused. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something raw and dangerous. A choice about whether the institution would protect itself or interrogate itself. Judge Marcus finally spoke. "Motion to dismiss is under consideration. I will issue a ruling within 72 hours. She banged the gavel once. The session adjourned. But the war had just escalated. Outside, the press swarmed Jasmine. One reporter shoved a mic toward her. "Congresswoman, if the judge rules to dismiss, will you drop the case?" Jasmine looked directly into the camera. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut marble. "If the system can't survive a question, it was never justice, it was theater." She walked away before they could ask more. Inside the courthouse, Worth muttered to his assistant, "She talks like she's writing a novel." "Maybe," the assistant said, "but the country's reading it? And in every state, in every law school, in every community where power had long gone unchallenged, a new question began to bloom. What happens when the law itself is the one on trial?" The courtroom felt electric, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The lead counsel, Benton Worth, rose with the smug smoothness of a man who knew how to weaponize politeness. "Your Honor, we respectfully move to dismiss the plaintiff's complaint in its entirety on the grounds that it is a politically motivated, baseless retaliation lacking any legal merit under current precedent." Judge Marcus, a moderate appointee known for her restraint, watched him carefully. She didn't blink. But she also didn't write anything down, Worth continued. "The judiciary must remain above partisan spectacle. Allowing this case to proceed would set a chilling precedent, opening the door for elected officials to retaliate against judges every time they dislike a ruling." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Jasmine without even looking at her. "This is not about justice, it is about optics. The plaintiff seeks headlines, not remedy." Jasmine felt her jaw tighten. Daria stood calmly. "Your Honor, the defense would have you believe this is about disagreement. It's not. This is about deliberate abuse of authority. We allege that a federal judge conspired with private interests to silence a sitting congresswoman for protected political speech. That's not a spectacle. That's a crisis." She stepped forward, her voice steady but rising. "We have evidence of communications between Judge Henley's clerk and a major contractor whose business interests were threatened by Representative Crockett's legislative oversight. We have timeline alignment between these communications and the issuance of the $10 million fine. We have motive. We have pattern, and soon we will have sworn testimony." Murmurs rose from the gallery. Judge Marcus tapped her gavel once. "I'll hear no more from the gallery. Counsel may proceed." Worth stood again, brushing off his coat sleeve. "Miss Crockett believes she can tear down the system from within. But this courtroom is not a pulpit, it is bound by law." Daria didn't flinch. "Then let the law speak." The judge paused. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full of something raw and dangerous. A choice about whether the institution would protect itself or interrogate itself. Judge Marcus finally spoke. "Motion to dismiss is under consideration. I will issue a ruling within 72 hours. She banged the gavel once. The session adjourned. But the war had just escalated. Outside. The press swarmed Jasmine. One reporter shoved a mic toward her. "Congresswoman, if the judge rules to dismiss, will you drop the case?" Jasmine looked directly into the camera. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut marble. "If the system can't survive a question, it was never justice, it was theater." She walked away before they could ask more. Inside the courthouse, Worth muttered to his assistant, "She talks like she's writing a novel." "Maybe," the assistant said. But the country's reading it. And in every state, in every law school, in every community where power had long gone unchallenged, a new question began to bloom. What happens when the law itself is the one on trial? The courtroom felt electric, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The seats were packed, reporters, activists, lawyers, and curious onlookers. Cameras discreetly positioned to catch every flicker of emotion. This was no ordinary trial. It was a public reckoning. Jasmine sat poised, eyes scanning the courtroom, but her voice was calm when her lead attorney, Daria Singh, rose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, this case is not about a personal vendetta. It is about the fundamental right to hold power accountable without fear of retribution." She paced slowly, commanding the room. Judge Henley wielded his authority not as a servant of justice, but as a sword to silence. A judge who collaborates with private interests to punish political speech betrays the very oath he swore. Henley's defense attorney, Benton Worth, countered, voice measured and cold. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's claims rely on insinuations and conjecture. The judiciary must remain impartial and shielded from political attacks, or it will descend into chaos." He locked eyes briefly with Jasmine, a flicker of disdain crossing his face. Daria pressed on, Impartiality is a sacred ideal, but impartiality does not grant immunity to corruption. When courts become tools of political suppression, the entire system crumbles. The judge, Marquez, listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. The gallery was silent, except for the scribbling of court reporters. Jasmine's own heart pounded not from nerves, but conviction. Her voice was steady as she took the stand for the first time. I stood on the House floor and spoke truth because silence was complicity. I knew it risked retaliation, but I never imagined that the very judge meant to protect. Justice would use his power to silence me. The courtroom shifted, breaths held. This is not about me. This is about the people. Every voice that has been silenced by threats and fines, every truth buried by fear. Today the law itself is on trial. A hush fell. In the back, a young law student whispered to her friend, "She's fighting not just for herself, but for all of us." Outside, social media erupted. Clips of Jasmine's testimony spread fast. Hashtags like #Justice for Crockett and #Courtroom Reckoning trended within hours. Judge Henley sat stone-faced, but beneath his calm, tension coiled tighter. His legal team exchanged worried glances. The courtroom drama was no longer just about law. It was a battle for the soul of justice itself. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Jasmine's apartment, casting long shadows on the worn hardwood floors. The city below moved indifferent, but inside, tension pulsed thick and heavy. Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, head resting on clenched fists. Malik watched her quietly, unsure if he should speak. "You ever wonder what this is doing to them?" he finally asked, voice low. "The judge, his family, the people caught in this mess." She looked up slowly, eyes sharp but tired. "I wonder what it's doing to me." Her voice cracked, a rare fracture in her usually steely armor. "This fight isn't just about law or politics, it's about survival. Mine, theirs, ours." Malik leaned forward. "Do you regret going public with the counter-lawsuit?" "No," she shook her head fiercely. "If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in a system that devours truth." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jasmine's assistant, Rosa, entered, holding an envelope. "This came for you," Rosa said quietly. Jasmine took it with a frown. The handwriting was unfamiliar, no return address. She opened it slowly. Inside was a photo, a smiling woman and a young boy, standing in front of a small house. The woman was her mother, the boy, her nephew. Underneath, a message, "Stop this. Now think of your family." A chill settled over the room. Malik's face darkened. "Threats, they've started." Jasmine folded the photo carefully and stood. "They want me afraid. Are you?" She paused, looking out the window at the sprawling cityscape. "Fear is what keeps us quiet. But I don't intend to be quiet." Later that evening, Jasmine sat alone on her balcony, phone pressed to her ear. "Judge Henley," she said softly. There was a pause, then a voice, cold and measured. "Congresswoman Crockett." "You don't know me," she said. "I know enough." Henley replied, "You've turned a courtroom into a battlefield. But remember, this fight has consequences." "I'm ready," Jasmine said. They were two warriors on opposite ends of a broken system, each carrying the weight of their own truths and their own shadows. The war wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It was personal. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, an electric anticipation humming in the air. Reporters jostled for space, their cameras aimed at the front where the judge presided with unyielding focus. Jasmine sat at the plaintiff's table, calm but alert, her eyes locked on the witness box. Today was pivotal. A former employee of Sentinel Systems was set to testify about the inner workings of the lobby that had entwined itself with Judge Henley's office. The witness, Marcus Vance, entered with the hesitant gait of a man burdened by secrets. His eyes darted briefly toward Jasmine before settling on the judge, the prosecution's lead attorney. Daria Singh rose with measured confidence. "Mr. Vance, can you describe your role at Sentinel Systems during the time period relevant to this case?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I was part of the contracts department, handling communications between our CEO and external legal advisors." Daria leaned in. Did you ever witness or become aware of any communications between Sentinel Systems and Judge Henley or his staff? A pause. Yes, emails and phone calls discussing strategies to protect the company's interests, especially regarding legislation that Representative Crockett was pushing. The courtroom stirred. Daria pressed on. Did these communications involve efforts to influence judicial actions against Representative Crockett? Marcus swallowed. There was talk about neutralizing the threat. Specific instructions were passed to Judge Henley's clerk to prepare a response. Henley's defense counsel stood sharply. Objection, speculation. Judge Marquez raised a hand. Overruled. The witness may continue. Marcus's voice lowered, trembling slightly. I was told to delete some emails, but I kept copies. I handed them to my lawyer. Jasmine's gaze burned with quiet vindication. Daria closed her notebook. No further questions, Your Honor. Outside, murmurs rippled. This testimony could crack the foundation Henley had tried to build. Henley's lips pressed into a thin line. The courtroom had shifted. The battle for justice was no longer abstract. It was unmistakably real. The courtroom was charged with a new intensity as Marcus Vance's testimony echoed through the halls. Whispers rippled like a restless tide. Justice in motion, or chaos unleashed. Judge Marcus called the session back to order. Her gaze steady but heavy. Counsel for the defense, your cross-examination. Benton Worth rose, his expression a mask of composed certainty. Mr. Vance, you claim to have witnessed communications linking Sentinel Systems and Judge Henley's staff. Can you provide tangible evidence, or is this merely hearsay? Marcus swallowed, his hands trembling slightly. I brought copies of emails, sir. He handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff. These were submitted to my legal counsel and are authentic. Worth's lips tightened. Isn't it true, Mr. Vance, that you have personal grievances against Sentinel Systems? That you were recently terminated for misconduct? A murmur swept the courtroom. Marcus met the lawyer's gaze. I was terminated after raising concerns about unethical practices. My conscience compelled me to act. Worth's tone sharpened. So your testimony is motivated by retaliation? Jasmine leaned forward, eyes blazing, or motivated by truth. The judge raised a hand. Enough. The court will not tolerate attacks on witness credibility beyond relevant scope. The tension thickened as the defense team retreated, recalibrating their strategy. Jasmine's mind raced. This moment was more than a legal battle, it was a moral crucible. If the witness cracked, the case would falter. But if he stood firm, the fortress of judicial immunity would tremble. Later, in a quiet corridor, Jasmine faced Daria. This is war, she said quietly. And the system's going to do everything it can to break us. Daria nodded. But truth has a way of finding light, even in the darkest rooms. Jasmine clenched her fist, steeling herself. Then let's be the flame. Outside, reporters scribbled feverishly. The story spreading like wildfire. The battle lines had been drawn clearly. Justice wasn't just being argued. It was being forged in fire. The courtroom felt suspended in time, every breath drawn heavy with anticipation. The gallery was packed. The press corps silent, their cameras trained like hawks. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a crucible where justice and power clashed in raw form. Judge Marcus adjusted her glasses and looked over her notes, then addressed the courtroom. The court will now hear closing arguments. Daria rose first, her voice steady but charged with quiet fire. Your Honor, this case is about more than procedural legality. It is about the essence of justice, and what happens when those entrusted with power weaponize it to silence truth. Representative Crockett's countersuit challenges the very foundations of judicial accountability. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We have presented evidence, not conjecture, of collusion between a sitting federal judge and private interests to impose a punitive fine designed to intimidate and suppress political speech. The courtroom hung on her every word. If the judiciary is allowed to cloak itself in invulnerability, unchecked by the very laws it enforces, then the people lose faith in the system meant to protect them. Daria Sutt and Benton Worth rose, his tone deliberate, each word measured like a scalpel. Your Honor, the defense recognizes the gravity of the plaintiff's claims. However, the rule of law requires more than emotion and innuendo. We contend that the fine imposed was lawful and that accusations against Judge Henley are unfounded and politically motivated. He swept his gaze over the courtroom. To erode judicial independence on the basis of contested political disputes is to undermine the very fabric of our democracy. Judge Marcus leaned forward, fingers steepled. The court recognizes the stakes involved. This is a matter of institutional integrity as well as individual rights. Her eyes fixed on Jasmine. Congresswoman Crockett, your courage in bringing this case is noted. But the court must also consider precedent and the limits of judicial discretion. Jasmine swallowed, steadying herself, then spoke from her seat. Your Honor, respect for the law does not require silence in the face of abuse. It requires accountability. Her voice was calm but resolute. When a judge uses his position to exact political revenge, the law becomes a weapon, not a shield. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Marquez nodded slowly. I will take the matter under advisement. A ruling will be issued in due course. As the gavel fell, the courtroom erupted into hushed conversation. Jasmine exhaled deeply, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters sought her statement. This case isn't just mine, she told them, voice steady and clear. It's about whether justice serves the powerful or the people. The fight was far from over, but for the first time the scales of justice trembled in her favor.